Hey you guys, it's me Laura with Scraps of Encouragement, and today I'm here with some paper pumpkin alternatives from the Hugs for Shelli May 2019 Paper Pumpkin Kit. Today I'm mostly focusing on products that came with your kit, and I may add some things you probably already have, like additional cardstock, ink, adhesives, or other common crafting supplies, but I'm trying mostly to stick with what you have from the kit so you can recreate these cards. So let's get started. For card number 1, I am using the tissue paper that came in the kit, and I cut out a piece of 2 3/4 by 4-inch Whisper White thick cardstock, and right now I am just placing that behind the tissue paper with the smooth side up so that I'm stamping on the smooth side of the paper. I'm just using some stamps from the kit with the Early Espresso ink that came in the kit, and I am stamping my sentiment and my flowers on the area that the cardstock fills up. So that's why I have it back there so that I can make sure everything is in frame, I guess you could say. And so I am just stamping that on that tissue paper directly. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that tissue paper and I am crinkling it up. And you can do this as much or as little as you want to kind of weather it a little bit. And then I took a sponge. You can use a makeup applicator. You can use, I don't know, just about anything that you can find lying around at home. And I am putting that glue on there, just kind of a thin layer. I didn't want to glue directly like regularly because I don't want that glue to seep through the tissue paper, but I want it to cover it well so that it stays on there pretty good. Now, when I put this on the first time, it wasn't straight. So I took it off and straightened things up a little bit and got it down there. And what I started to do is I started to cut this off of the side, but then I realized I didn't really like the white showing from the cardstock underneath. So instead I decided to fold it over, and you could cut it down a little bit more if you don't want so much bulk on the back of your card. But I just glued that down, and there I have my little panel for my card. Now I put this on the back of some Early Espresso, and I put my dimensionals on the back of my tissue paper panel. If I had to do it again, I would have glued this directly onto the Early Espresso and then popped up the whole panel. But that's okay. You learn when you make cards and you make things different sometimes the second time around. So I am putting this down, getting it lined up, and then I am going to bring in some petal pink cardstock, and that matches everything in the kit, and I am just making a card base there. And I thought it would be nice to stamp some of those flowers onto my petal pink base to kind of pull the design down into the card base, the background there. And in order to do this, I just did groups of 3 cards on the top corner and the bottom corner there. And I stamped off once before I stamped them down so that the ink would be just a little bit lighter so that it wouldn't be quite as bold as my sentiment and my stamps on my front panel. And then all I need to do is take some glue, and I glued this down, and there is card number 1. For card number 2, I am using the feather stamp that came in the kit, and I am using the ink splotches and the hello stamp. Now I'm using my Stamparatus for this. You do not have to do that. You can totally just use stamping blocks, but I thought that it would make this process a little bit more exact. I struggle with lining things up, and this helps me. So I am lining up that feather on the far left corner. I brought in several colors of ink, starting with Poppy Parade, and I am going to ink that feather up and stamp it really well. And this is where the beauty of the Stamparatus comes in. I'm going to clean that stamp off, and after I cleaned it really well, I want to make sure it's cleaned well so I don't transfer any of that ink. I'm going to move my plate over one slot and ink it up with Mango Melody, and then stamp that down. And I'm doing the same with the Pacific Point. I'm going to move it over one and stamp it down. And then I am also going to do the same with my Granny Apple Green. And the cool thing about this is that everything is nice and neatly lined up exactly where I want it. And I tried to do one more with the Gorgeous Grape, but it would not fit on my card, so I will use that on the inside. And then since I have my Stamparatus out, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my hello. I'm using, I think, Gray Granite for this one. And then I am going to stamp some ink splotches on my card. And I am just stamping these around randomly where I think they will fit, trying to kind of make a visual triangle. And now I have a white card base, and I'm not going to put a border behind my panel. You could put a colored border, but I am just going to pop this up on dimensionals, and that is really it for card number 2. Oh, no, it's not. I forgot. That's right. On the inside, I stamped my purple feather, and then I put a little bit more ink splash. Now that really is done for card number 2. So for card number 3, this one's a little bit more involved. I am going to start by coloring my nest, and I am using the watercolor pencils. You can use anything you have to color with, but I'm using Coastal Cabana, Daffodil Delight, Old Olive, and Early Espresso. Like I said, use any colored pencils or coloring mediums that you have around. And I am going to speed through this coloring really quickly and let you watch. This step is totally optional, but since I use watercolor pencils, I'm going to go ahead and activate that watercolor piece of it using my blender pen and my Wink of Stella. My Wink of Stella is a little bit shimmery, so you'll notice that the eggs have a little shimmer to them. But the method I'm using is I'm kind of starting in the areas where I shaded a little bit darker, and I'm pulling that color out to kind of add a little bit of shading and a little bit of depth. And this is just going to give a watercolor feel to my coloring without adding a lot of water to my paper, so it makes it nice and easy. So then once I have that all colored, I am going to cut it out, and I'm going to just fussy cut it with my scissors. I'm leaving a little bit of a border around the edges to kind of give me a little bit more freedom and give me the ability to not be quite so perfect with it. And I'm just going to cut this out. With the magic of video editing, it is all cut out and ready to go. I knew I wanted to use one of these cards as a background to the nest, but I wasn't sure which one I would like best, and I ended up going with the scripty one. I cut a pretty peacock background that's the same size as the note card, so it is 3.5 by 7 inches, and then I scored it to be a gatefold card. And then I cut the panel from the original note card in 2 pieces and left a little border around the edge, and I am just lining those up here on my card. And then for the inside, I'm just using the back half that I didn't use before of that same note card, and I am cutting it down, and I am going to stamp on it with Pretty Peacock and the Early Espresso that came in the kit, and I'm just carrying those splotches over from the front of the card, and I'm stamping off once before I stamp it on the paper just so that they're a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to stamp my sentiment here on the card as well. Now you can totally just leave it like this, but I like to have a little more room to write on my card. I know some people don't. So I'm also going to take some very vanilla cardstock, and I'm going to cut that down so that there's some panels on the side there as well. You can also use another note card back from the kit. If you have that, that is just fine. But once I put that down, I decided I wanted to go ahead and carry those splotches over a little bit so that it looks a little bit more cohesive across the whole card. So now that I have that done, I need to make my belly band. So this is a 3/4 of an inch long piece of paper that I'm just going to wrap around. And I decided that I wanted to put some ribbon on top as well, just to give it a little bit more dimension. So I am going to glue that together, and then I am going to add my ribbon. And normally I don't use glue with ribbon, like liquid glue, but this ribbon is so thick, I decided that that would be a good way to get it down. The nest was a little too long, I thought, so I'm just chopping off a bit of that to make it fit on my card a little bit better. And then I was struggling to figure out how to glue it down, so I just glued it down with the glue, but I felt like that might not be secure enough, so I added a couple glue dots to the back as well, just as kind of extra reinforcement. And then all I had to do was slide that on my card, and that is all for card number 3. For card number 4, I am using the envelopes that came in the kit. As soon as I saw these, I knew I would have to make a card from them because they're so adorable. So I'm just cutting the ends off just enough to make it so that I can take apart my envelope and make a panel. I didn't really measure. And then I got my crumb cake ink from my stash, and I'm using that just to carry those splotches on up the corners of the card. There were a few already by the nest, so I just carried that on up. And then I'm using my early espresso from the kit to stamp my sentiment. And then I thought I would use one of those really pretty vellum feathers that came to add on to the kit there. And I'm just using a little bit of snail. Glue dots would work just fine as well. And then I took a few of the flower die cuts, I guess just one of the bigger ones, and popped that up on dimensionals. Now I decided I wanted to go ahead and cut this down to be the size of a standard note card, which is 3.5 by 5. And then I'm adding a piece of crumb cake behind it with just 1/8 inch of a border. And my idea came from the actual label itself. I really liked the way that was. With the border there, and so then I'm just gluing this all together, layering it up, and my base there is very vanilla card base, so I thought that that went really well with the label that was in there, and I'm just gluing it together as a flat card. Now once I got this together, I had the idea to add some twine. Now you could do that on the panel and then you don't have to wrap it around your card, and that's fine too, but I had the idea after I already had my panel on. So I just wrapped it around my card base, and I am just going to tie a bow here with my twine and snip the ends off, and that's it. That card is super simple for card number 4. Card number 5 is also really easy. I am using this blue card that came from the kit, and I will be cutting some of the solid blue background off. I am just measuring my sentiment stamp to see how much space I'm going to need for that panel, because it's going to be where I stamp my sentiment. So I'm cutting that off of the back of the card, and I am just checking to make sure that it fits right. And I'm going to be putting some of this ribbon over to kind of cover that seam there. So I'm cutting the front of my panel off, and that will be the background of my card. And then I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment on the little blue strip that I cut earlier. I'm using the early espresso ink from the kit, and I'm stamping it down a little low because I know that the ribbon is going to take up some space on the top there. And so I'm just going to glue that straight down to my card panel. And then I'm going to pull in some of that ribbon, and I am going to, because it's so thick, I'm going to put some glue across the bottom of it. Normally I would use tape runner for that, but this is such a thick ribbon, I'm using glue. So I'm just going to put that there on my card, and then I want to make sure that it's going to stay down really well. So I'm going to glue it in the back, but then just to kind of double check and make sure, I am going to secure it with some double-sided tape. This is the strongest adhesive that we have. I like to use it for boxes and things that I really want to stay together. And you can use this with your cards and just leave the second side on if you're going to pop up the panel, or if you're going to put it on your card base flat, you can take those sticky parts off and it'll just give you some extra stick. Now I felt like this card needed a little bit more, so I grabbed some of the flower die cuts that came in the kit, and normally I would pop something like this up, but because that ribbon has so much weight to it, it kind of pops things up on its own. So I'm just using some of that two-sided tape again, and I am going to stick these flowers in on my card. For the ones in the back, I'm actually sticking them to the flowers, the blue flowers in the front. I'm not sticking them onto the ribbon, so I just used a little bit of snail adhesive to stick them onto those flowers in front of them, so they all kind of become one big element. And then I'm going to take my card base, which for this I just used a note card base that I had. So it's the same size as the card. If you have very vanilla, that will work better. I only had the Whisper White. So then I'm just going to glue this card base directly down. I decided to go ahead and use the sticky side of that double-sided tape and add some glue and get that on there. And the tape makes it a little hard to work with, but I lined it up on the paper below. And that is card number 5. Thank you so much for joining me as we created these alternative projects using the May 2019 Paper Pumpkin Card Kit. I hope you learned a few things and had a good time, and I'd love for you to join me next month as I share more alternative ideas to make with your June kit. If you loved the May 2019 Paper Pumpkin Kit but missed out on it, be sure to look for my Inspired by Paper Pumpkin video that I'll be posting soon, where I'll be sharing products with a similar look and feel. And if you'd like more card making inspiration, be sure to check out my website at scrapsoфencouragement.com. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on Facebook. And as always, I hope you find joy in creating as you spread kindness and encouragement with your scraps of paper. Talk to you later. Bye.